Welcome to the Intensely Casual Conversations. I'm Logan.
And this is Chris.
And today we're going to go over some of the things we have coming up in the future for Intensely Casual. We're going to talk to you about the current commentaries that we have released and are in the works. We're going to answer a question I got from a friend about what is a franchise. We're going to talk a little bit about Netflix's Sandman. And then we're going to move on to our main topic, which is Marvel's Wandavision, a show that it takes a show to have really great potential to break your heart. Like, it's just bad from the start. You're not bothered.
Yeah.
This one broke my heart. It really kind of is the model for everything that came after.
And not right away.
Not right.
Initially, like we were on board with it.
But the flaws of WandaVision were repeated in practically every Marvel series. They were repeated in practically every Star Wars series in Disney. And frankly, just lots of series in lots of places.
Yeah.
Right? So that's what we're going to be focusing on, is how and why WandaVision let us down. And more importantly, like, what it tells you about what people who are making the stories were thinking, and how to identify the problems that are in WandaVision in other works.
And how to avoid them.
Yes. Particularly when to know the warning sign is that you're going to have a problem.
Yeah.
So with that said, I think I want to start by talking about the 5-year engagement. Oh, and actually, Bros, while we're at it, the movie Bros. So we just put out our commentary on the movie The 5-Year Engagement, which was written by Jason Segel and Nicholas Stoller, and then directed by Nicholas Stoller, whose movie Bros just came out, a movie he made with Billy Eichner, and it did not do well.
Yeah. Which one?
Well, neither of them did, but Bros did not do well, and I think fundamentally, so with 5-year engagement, the reason we use it as a negative example of quality, because for us, it had so much appeal, right?
It had so many opportunities to succeed.
Well, you think about it, we liked the actors: Jason Segel, Chris Pratt, Alison Brie, Emily Blunt, in no particular order there, right? Tons of great actors. We liked
directors.
We liked forgetting Sarah Marshall, which was written in same creative pair. And then of course, we're sitting in what I call the House of Huron, because I've lived almost my entire life on the Huron River here in Ann Arbor, Michigan. So I'm watching this movie. I've just moved to Ann Arbor, Michigan. So everything was designed to make. Oh, Chris Parnell's in that movie too.
Oh yeah. Another one that we love from Archer and various other.
Yeah. So I mean, like, honestly, there's so much we could have liked, but it's every single one of us at Intensely Casual, me, Jen, you. The first time we watched it, our jaws literally dropped.
Yeah, it was funny. We should have done a reaction video.
Yeah, I should have done that with you and Jen, because I went first. You cannot accept that. Your System 1 brain cannot engage with that movie. It immediately provokes disbelief. Over and over and over again. Like, you're willing to tolerate a lot in a story. You're willing to tolerate completely made up components and of the story, like dragons or magic or aliens. But this movie, I'm not going to spoil the commentary. You can check it out. It starts very, very fast. Like, the opening sequence, his plan makes no sense to anybody, and is so bad that you'll excuse like something being implausible for the sake of comedy.
Yeah.
His plan is so insane, it's not even funny. I mean, that's an expression people use, but it's literally the case here. You're like, wait a second, none of this makes any sense. You don't have to be an expert to realize it.
Yeah.
So coming back to Bros, we haven't seen Bros. And honestly,
we're only basing this just on the commercial.
Yeah, we saw a commercial, and I think part of the problem is, movies at this moment, for whatever reason, a lot of them aren't doing well. The only movie I've been to see since the pandemic was when we took our families to see Spider-Man.
The Way Home.
No Way Home. Yeah, No Way Home. So, I mean, it wasn't like we were ever going to see this, and I might give it a look. But I will point out that in terms of appeal factors, I think that's where the marketing for this movie really went wrong, because everything about it was to show how gay it was, right? He's a gay man who works at a gay museum. There's him at a gay pride parade. And then the music for it is famously gay musicians like George Michael and Queen. And I'm watching that thing, and there's a moment where he's talking to a straight couple that are his friends.
Yeah.
But really, that if you want that story to appeal to straight people, you needed like a
wider audience,
or just a wide. Well, that is straight people.
Yeah.
Much wider audience than gay. If you want straight people to show up, you need to put in like a sassy straight friend, right?
Yeah.
Somebody that the audience could sort of identify with. Because as I say all the time, like I don't mind watching gay sex in a movie or gay people together. But like, for me, like a really good example is I really like the first season of How to Get Away with Murder.
Okay.
And there's a lot of gay sex, particularly in the early parts of that season. But you're never going to sell me on something with gay sex.
Yeah.
Like the story must otherwise interest me. And I think that's where they really kind of missed their... If they wanted people to show up in droves...
They needed a grace or something. Like in your Will and Grace kind of...
Yeah, something. And, then Billy Eichner, when I was like, straight people, you need to see it. It's your fault. It's not doing well. If you care about gay people, you need to... Look, we're going to talk a lot about caring in this conversation we're having, but in just a minute. But when you appeal to people's caring, like, oh, you're helping gay people can only care so much.
Yeah.
Right? And they can only focus so much of their attention to caring to all the issues. At the end of the day, if you had focused on making a movie that, and again, the movie might really be, this could just be the marketing. The movie might really be something I sit down and watch it and I'm like, oh, this is my favorite movie ever.
Yeah. We're not against rom-coms or anything like that, because that's kind of how it's bolstered. Well,
it is a rom-com. But, as I always say, people, I like comedies. It doesn't matter what kind of comedy it is. If it's a decent comedy, I'm happy to watch it. But in this case, I really felt it was unfair to just like blame straight people for a movie. Because here's the thing. There's a whole attitude right now in story creation where sometimes people are like, it's not for you. It's not. So if you don't like it, doesn't matter. It's not for you. But then you want me to show up and watch it. And you got to pick a lane on that. Either it's for me to watch and show caring by supporting you, or it's for me to ignore.
Yeah.
And it feels like that decision is always made after the fact. They're picking whichever decision, is good for them. Like if they're taking a lot of flack from an audience, it wasn't for you. If the movie is like they tried to do with She-Hulk, and we'll talk about that. There's a reason why for She-Hulk specifically that doesn't work. Or in this case, it's like, well, since it wasn't doing well, we need straight people to show up, and I don't know which to do at any given time.
Yeah. We need flags. We need the rating system, but for
in all honesty, we've talked about how with the intensely casual method for evaluating stories, like there's no like rubric for evaluating a story on paper because there's too many subjective elements. Like only you can know what matters to you and how much. But it wouldn't go wrong for movies because genre is already kind of a list of appeal factors.
Yeah.
But like to have more specific ones. Like here's the content you will get in this story. And then the surprise will be watching it unfold, right? Like seeing how it's delivered. But with that said, so if you want to see art, and the other thing is because I know it's about 5-year engagement, I know it could be really good, but I know it's a crapshoot. It could be really bad.
Plus, it also has the people involved in the same.
That's what I'm saying. Like this could work out fantastically, or it could be awful, and that's asking a lot, right?
Yeah.
Sometimes you'd almost rather know it's going to be mediocre than being 50-50 terrible or bad, because the mediocre thing probably isn't going to waste your time.
Yeah.
But if it's really bad, because you only need to watch so many like you can enjoy watching bad movies, but you only need so many of those. Most people. Again, everybody's tastes are different. But so our next commentary, we're almost out of commentaries to post now that we sort of had in the can before we launched the book, The Intensely Casual Guide to Good Story.
On shelves now.
Yeah, well, it's not on shelves anywhere.
Amazon shelves.
It's on Amazon. You can get there print on demand or as an ebook. It's also as an ebook at Barnes & Noble, Kobo, and Google. And the commentaries can be located at the Intensely Casual Commentaries pretty much anywhere you get podcasts. Apple, Google, I believe Stitcher, Spotify definitely. And going forward with that, now that we are underway, we're actually going to start taking a crack at really important, particularly nerd culture movies. Movies that have been important for shaping the modern franchise story landscape. And so we're going to start. Our next one's going to be Star Wars. And that, because Star Wars is the beginning. Star Wars is the beginning of not franchises, but franchise storytelling.
Yeah.
Businesses that create a franchise out of a story experience, as opposed to something else like a sports team where there is a narrative, but they're not really selling you the narrative is what gives everything value, but what they're selling you is tickets and merchandise and things like that. But they're not literally selling you the story.
Right.
Whereas,
they're selling you the inclusive groupness.
Yes. And that's brings us to the question we got from my friend Steve, which is Planet of the Apes a franchise? And the Planet of the Apes property taken as a whole, is it a franchise? And certainly, if you're using the term loosely, then yeah, right. I wouldn't really correct somebody for calling it a franchise. But here at Intensely Casual, we use franchise to specifically mean that the business isn't just selling you a product, it's selling you membership implicitly in some sort of community.
A lifestyle.
And importantly, a recognizable community, right?
Yeah.
So,
like in sports, you're a Wolverine fan, you're a Spartan, you're here in Michigan, those are Michigan ones, but like
Tigers fan, Lions fan, right?
Yeah.
And a key aspect of franchises, of course, is that it's very hard to transfer your loyalty to something else, right? It's very hard for a Lions fan to switch to being a fan. The Lions are terrible, right? Yeah. Historically, one of the worst teams in all of sporting history. But you can't. Why are there still Lions fans? Well, because they're not just trying to watch a team win. It's about having a shared experience,
right?
And your friends that you're connected to, and family and traditions that you're connected to through a sports team can't be transferred to another team,
right?
So to answer the question whether or not Planet of the Apes is a franchise, I'm going, for our purposes, I say it isn't. And here's why. Because if I say to you someone is a Star Wars fan, you're going to get a picture of a Star Wars fan in your mind.
Or if you say like Trekkie.
Yes. Star Trek.
You already got something.
And not only are they going to be in different costumes, right? You're going to see them as subtly different people in your mind.
Yeah.
But if I say to you someone is a Planet of the Apes fan, I suspect that I've not communicated anything to you except that they're a Planet of the Apes fan.
They could be in who knows what country like that. I couldn't imagine what that would be.
Yeah. I mean, people do enjoy it, but there's no stereotype in your head, right?
Right.
And I think it's because it actually lacks one of the most important aspects of a franchise, which is you need either a founder or an early central heroic figure for the franchise for people to sort of unify around. Like George Lucas in the case of Star Wars.
You mean Charlton Heston isn't?
No, because I think he's only in I think he's in one and then maybe like part of the second.
Yep.
Yeah, he's not really in the second very much at all. Yeah, so it lacks. There's no chief creator like a J.K. Rowling with Harry Potter.
Right.
Gene Roddenberry with Star Trek. George Lucas with Star Wars. And again, but it doesn't have to be a founder, right? So like the sort of quintessential hero of the Red Wings hockey team in Detroit is Gordie Howe. That guy is so important to Detroit that they're naming the new international crossing after him. In Transformers, you might say there's no founding figure. Optimus Prime, and to some extent Megatron and their relationship.
Bumblebee lately.
Well, somewhat. They're trying to make a thing of him, but like it really is Optimus Prime. That's like why? Because here's the thing: they didn't kill Bumblebee in the animated The Transformers the movie,
right?
And Transformers still died. It's because they killed Optimus Prime.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah.
The movie died.
That's why because you can do a Bumblebee movie separate from Transformers, but I'm not sure you could ever do Transformers separate from Optimus Prime.
Yeah.
You'd be taking a huge risk. So that is my take on Planet of the Apes, and honestly, you could say. By the way, you could say the same thing about the Matrix movies. Do I think they're a franchise? No. So popular, even though they have a lot of the elements you might think of as a franchise, so popular with so many people that you never. Basically, it's people have either seen it and they like it, or they've seen it and they don't, or they're really too into it. Yeah. But you don't think of it as like there's no community of people who love
the
franchise that as such that you. How can I put this? people dressed up like they're in the Matrix, but that was just the fashion for a while after the Matrix, right?
You wouldn't consider yourself any sort of personal type or belief structure or anything like that.
Yeah. And again, it's not to say there aren't groups around it, but there's just not enough of, how can I put this? Because franchise is a way of identifying strangers as being one of the tribe, right? And I suspect that the really hardcore Matrix people probably just all know each other. Like
and they probably haven't like progressed. Like Star Trek and Star Wars fans and
well, yeah, I mean they haven't been making product.
Yeah, they haven't been making product.
And when they have it, it was pretty bad.
Like the fourth one wasn't even like opportunity for more.
No, it was
merch
more like
or anything.
It was almost like we regret having to do this.
Yeah.
It's something they almost literally say in the movie.
Being a little too meta.
Yeah. So, Planet of the Apes not a franchise, but hopefully this gives you an idea of what we mean by a franchise story. And of course, why franchise stories are so important is because the story makers tend to assume that the audience must consume the content.
That we owe them something.
Yes. And so they will tend to start creating stories that give them value rather than, beyond just making money, that do what they want rather than giving you what you want.
And you want to hear more, we go into quite a bit of detail on the Transformers commentary.
Yeah, which is, that's not out yet, but it in the near future, in the next little while. So the last thing I want to talk about is Netflix's Sandman.
Oh, okay.
So there are rumors that it might not get a second season. And Neil Gaiman, I guess he went online, he thinks people watched it too slowly. And that maybe that's affecting its likelihood of being picked up. Here's the thing. So this isn't all of the Sandman comic books, because I have a couple of them out for reading. But, I do have all the Sandman books. And see right here, I got a bunch of them from back in the day. So, Sandman fan, without doubt.
So there's a lot of content there.
There is. The first season of Sandman covered basically the first two collections. But let's be clear, it wasn't very good. The Sandman TV series wasn't very good. And it's interesting because a lot of times people get upset about diversity casting, like on Rings of Power in particular. That's been a big thing lately. I think Sandman didn't take any flack in that particular area because it was being adapted by the founder, by Neil Gaiman.
Versus third party afterwards.
Yeah. I mean, it's sort of like the founder gets a lot more leeway to revise, particularly when they're adapting from one medium to the other. But Neil Gaiman, as always, showed he does not know how to cast things, because it's a weird situation where quite often he cast very good people in the gender or race swapped roles. But he insisted on casting a white guy for Morpheus. And that guy, I feel like he can't act. Or if he can, he wasn't being allowed to in this project, because he delivers every line just like this. And it's so bad that there's a moment where he's replaced by a black actor he's appearing as Morpheus in a previous form as he appeared to this woman's tribe. And he delivers just a couple of lines. I don't want to be unfair, right? That actor probably had more time to work on his lines. Maybe he had more time to work with a director and really get the take right in just those 2 or 3 lines. But he finished delivering those lines. I looked at Jen and I was like, I wish he was the one playing Morpheus. That is the one I wish was gender or race swapped or what have you. Because I really feel like if you're going to do diversity casting, you have no excuse for casting bad white people.
The lead actor.
And then this other character who's really important, her name is Rose. That's a race swap, and it's really the only one that I think just fundamentally doesn't work. And then at one point she like, I can tell her accent, she's putting on an American accent, right? So I assume she's British. I go to look her up. Nope, from Zimbabwe. And I'm like, oh my God, you don't have to go to Zimbabwe to find an actress that can act.
Yeah.
Because every line she said, that's the problem. There were several of those characters or several of those actors who every line they said, it felt like they were acting. It felt like you were watching an actor. I actually had a similar problem with the woman who played Death. And again, like, I get you want to be more diverse, but like, my favorite TV show of all time is The Good Place, and she was a minor character on The Good Place.
Oh, really?
Oh yeah, she played Simone on The Good Place, the woman Chidi meets on Earth and falls in love with. Yeah. And I had exactly the same problem on The Good Place. Like, I felt like I always knew she was acting, rather than just believing she was the character speaking. But this is a problem Neil Gaiman has, right? In Good Omens, there's this moment where, like, there's this group of satanic nuns, right? There's an array of them. And I know I've read the book before, so I know one of them is going to be important. And when I see it, and it shows you where diversity, okay, if you believe it matters, there's still a right way to do it and a wrong way to do it. I know exactly who that group of, they look like regular nuns, right? But I know exactly who the special one is when I look at the group of satanic nuns.
Okay.
Because she's the only black one. So they went out of their way to get like a part for the named character and made that a black person, right?
Okay.
But then cast like 20 or maybe more, I don't remember, a ton of just white nuns. Like, there were no black or South Asian, East Asian, there were no other races amongst the
Latina.
Extras. And it's like, that's what you can't have just the star be diverse, because it immediately reveals that, like, it takes me out of it, because I immediately know that's what happened.
Yeah.
Is at the casting level of the named speaking parts, they made sure to get to be diverse with all those parts, but then didn't think for a second to be diverse with the extras. I immediately understood, because you shouldn't know at first glance who that character is, right? I mean, she wasn't put at the center. They didn't focus on her. It's a wide shot. He created this weird situation where I knew exactly who the important person was going to be based on race. Yeah. Which I feel like is the opposite of what they're trying to do.
Yeah.
With representation.
That's not being inclusive. That's...
Well, it is, but it was being inclusive on a really shallow level. And in a way that forced me to think about it rather than thinking about the story when I'm watching it. Yeah. Because here's the thing. 10 years ago, I never really paid attention to the race of people in things, in movies and whatnot. Like, you understood... diversity isn't a new idea. You understood... Black people could appear in things, and you did. But the weird thing is, they've gotten worse at it, I feel like, these days. Because things are actually, they put more emphasis on making certain things diverse, but then, again, they missed the trick on the extras. And so you're watching it, and it reminds you you're watching a story, when they could have just hired diverse extras. Like, no one even stopped and thought about that. Yeah. Which, thinking of, and I don't think they did stop and think about it because of, we're sometimes blinded by our values and our beliefs and the conventions we bring to things, which is a great transition to Wandavision. So Wandavision. I had such high hopes for Wandavision. Because remember, Wandavision came like right after the end of Marvel Phase 3. It came right after Avengers Endgame. So Marvel's on a high at this point, right?
Yeah.
Marvel's on a high at this point, and they're going to they're going to start doing these MCU shows, and they'd had some decent shows. I liked the first season of Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. on ABC. I didn't watch it after that.
My folks really liked the whole show.
Yeah, I didn't care for it after because, but at the end of the first season of Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., it was tied into Captain America and Winter Soldier, and S.H.I.E.L.D. went away.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like, well, the story is over, and then they tried to bring back this one character that betrayed them. I'm like, no, he's gone. There's no way you can bring that character back. Like he wasn't dead, but like, there's no way they'll ever trust this person again. Like, I just couldn't engage with the show at that point.
Gotcha.
And that's me. It's fine for other people to have enjoyed it. I liked Daredevil season 1. I liked Jessica Jones season 1. I liked the first half of Daredevil season 2, and specifically because like the stakes were different.
Okay.
Right. The stories in Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. were smaller. They often dealt with like one problem at a time, or for a couple episodes. Daredevil, it was personal. It's him versus a crime lord, basically. And that's why the first half was so good, because it's like him versus the Punisher.
The other interesting thing with that was like he's dealing with real world situations, not, he's a lawyer, he's dealing with my boss, and yet there's this other crazy stuff going on. I remember seeing a part of a scene where like they're rebuilding the city where it was destroyed by some superhero battle.
Yeah. And that's actually where I kind of stopped enjoying Daredevil was when the second half of season 2 focused on the Hand and saving the world, the Hand ninjas and saving the world, because I'm like, nope, we went too much into exactly the same space we've been in. And this is a problem that we're going to talk about at the end, but I want to billboard it right now. One of the issues with franchise storytelling right now is franchises are supposed to be linked, but you're not supposed to deliver literally the same product every time. Like comic books have different scopes and scales. The problem, that's what made Jessica Jones, Daredevil, Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. great, was you got stories at different scopes and scales. But what is going to happen, what we've seen is they have a real tendency to make every one of these MCU shows universe shaking.
They're also a lot of times cookie cutter.
Yeah. So, and we get this, instead of getting difference, because we all value novelty to one degree or another. We all value familiarity too. But nobody values familiarity so much that they want literally the same thing every single time.
Yeah. That's why I take breaks from like reading Terry Pratchett novels and things like that. Or, if you watch a series of show like comedies, I'll watch Seinfeld or Big Bang or something. Like I got to rotate other things in.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And I mean, this is why, like, even someone who's like a huge John Wayne fan, they don't watch the same John Wayne movie every time. And you think about like people's favorite John Wayne movies, they're often the ones that step out, that stand out a bit from the others. Something like True Grit, although not the Genghis Khan one. Not the one where you play Genghis Khan. WandaVision seemed to be on that track, right? WandaVision, what we knew about it was that somehow Wanda was experiencing life as episodes of a sitcom with Vision, who last time we saw him was dead. And that there wasn't initially going to be any explanation for why he was alive. As much as I hate mystery box storytelling, it's okay to motivate a mystery if you know how to pay it off properly. Mm-hmm. And honestly, when I think of WandaVision, when I look back at it, if you cut all of the stuff about Sword out of it,
which you could probably easily do,
yeah, I think I actually do almost like it.
Yeah,
there's one problem with it that kind of kills it, but it's an interesting story. But the problem is, the more it leans into it steps out of that sitcom thing. It was like they didn't have confidence, because in the end, it's like any Marvel movie. It's people flying in the sky, shooting balls of energy at each other. It's just very more of the same.
Yeah. But you got to expect that to some extent, because it is a Marvel. Because if it wasn't, it would be something else.
But I mean, it's about her using her powers. It's about her, and of course, the idea was that you knew some way or another, either she was being manipulated, or it was her doing it to herself, or maybe she was trapped in her head. That this was probably going to be about her working through the death of Vision. Mm-hmm. That's the connection, right?
And that's the interesting piece.
Yes, that's the interesting piece. You didn't need it. You don't need it to formally be exactly like every other story that they've made. It was good they chose this other form.
Yeah.
And the familiarity came from, it was just another way of telling these stories, but they made sure to go back to the form. And in fact, there are things they did here in that show that I'm going to fully call mistakes.
Yeah. And they really reach out to do them too.
Sometimes they're, yeah. And moreover, like one of the big ones they make is that the believability for most people watching the show, it's very hard to suspend their disbelief, which is weird because
it's a superhero movie.
But one of the things you have to remember is the thing about, so the reason you can't divide by zero in math, right? The result is undefined. Because if you allowed for dividing by zero in math, you could basically make all numbers equal to each other, right? Especially there's certain, I think it's the reciprocal law in mathematics. You try to allow division for zero and apply it to the reciprocal number, you end up with weird equations like 1 = 5.
Or zero divided by 0 = 0.
Here's the thing, and I might have seemed like I was going on my way to make this point, but it's undefined, therefore it could literally be anything. They can't, but it's also kind of useless, right? Because it could be anything. It has no meaning. Because it has meaning, you could attach, in theory, any meaning to it. So when it comes to things like superpowers, right, they don't exist. It is because they don't exist that we can believe anything about them.
Right.
This is why, I heard a comment about, I haven't been watching House of the Dragon, No particular reason. Just I had other bad things on my plate. I hear it's pretty good, but I had a bunch of bad things on my plate to watch. But I heard somebody say about it, they were frustrated that people could believe dragons exist and breathe fire, but they couldn't believe in a black man at court. But here's the thing. I'm going to put it to you bluntly. Dragons don't exist, but racism does. Like,
Yeah.
you know, if you have
Sadly.
to, that's what I'm saying though, right? Yes, that actually makes sense because you can make up anything. Like their version of dragons are different from every other version of dragons because dragons don't exist.
Yeah.
But we know about racism, particularly in this moment of time. So when we see this weird historical multicultural society, and it's not that these sorts of cosmopolitan societies never existed, but you do need to like establish that the society works that way, right? I think that's actually one of the problems with Rings of Power. One of the weirdest things about watching that show to me, is how like each of the peoples of Middle Earth, what you would otherwise call races, are all multiracial. Like
Okay.
in all of their communities.
Well, there's
Like it's not like there's a tribe of black people and a tribe of white people. It's everybody is mixed everywhere. But then they still deal with racism. So they don't have like black and white racism amongst the people,
It's
but
elves
they have
and
elves
dwarves.
versus humans and yeah. And it's so weird to have racial things being dealt with by these completely mixed communities. And this is as far as I can tell, this is like people have complained about it being unrealistic. And that's not what I'm actually complaining about. It's just my System 1 brain doesn't have the pattern recognition, hasn't been trained on that as a convention well enough that it could handle both those things happening it couldn't handle diversity casting and then racism amongst the diversity casting that was blind to the diverse nature of the human actors cast. That was a mouthful. But that's the point. So WandaVision has a real believability problem, and to understand why it does, you have to understand the way storytellers think. And here's the deal. So when it comes to human personality, the personality factor that, if you're high on it, will push you towards being a liberal is called openness to new experience. In fact, this personality factor is more powerful than geography. It's more powerful than religion. It's more powerful than social ties. It is not that those things can't overwhelm it, but it is the single most prominent factor. There's a similar personality factor, conscientiousness, that drives you towards conservatism.
Okay.
So someone who's high in one of those is likely to go one way or the other. And if you're high in both, then you're probably experiencing a lot of tension between the two.
But having a more liberal side.
Yeah. So here's the thing, though. I was just taking a big breath because I talked a lot. That personality trait, openness to new experience, I call it novelty seeking just for short. I think it's also sometimes called neophilia. It is also the personality trait that drives people to want to do creative work, like be a storyteller, want to be a painter. This has a consequence. This is why stories are always, pretty much always have almost always have a liberal bent. Why playwrights, actors, directors, what have you, they're all politically liberal. Because the thing that selects you to be a playwright, director, or actor is also the personality trait that strongly selects you to be liberal. Is it possible to have conservatives? Absolutely. Clint Eastwood, Mel Gibson, I almost said Mel Brooks, are two prominent examples of people who are probably also high in conscientiousness and go the conservative side, but they can make stories.
Yeah.
But for the most part, it's not even about capability. Sometimes I do say like conservatives probably aren't well suited to creative storytelling. I think there's something about conscientiousness that makes them uncomfortable with doubt and gray areas and dilemmas. Like when you know what the right answer is, when you believe strongly in a right answer, it's hard to write an interesting story. Because then the right answer is that was one of the problems with 5 Year Engagement, right? Is there were so many times what he should do was obvious, and then like 30 minutes later into the movie, he would just do it for no reason. It's like, why didn't you do this? I've been sitting here. I'm not a cook or a chef, and I've been thinking this for half an hour as I watch the movie. So that's why that bias exists. There is something else you have to understand. We don't talk a lot about conservatives at Intensely Casual because of this.
Yeah.
All right. The values of conservatives are not super relevant to the way stories are being made right now. Because there's always just not that many. But conservatives have a more complex, or at least a higher number of bases for their morality than liberals do. Liberals really focus on two things. They focus on fairness, and what they mean by fairness is different from what conservatives mean by fairness. For liberals, fairness is usually about equality of outcome and respecting people's rights, whereas for conservatives, they tend to define that as getting your just desserts, right? Being rewarded in proportion to your efforts, to your negative actions. And for most of us who aren't in the extreme, these are just, we understand both ideas and they're under tension. And then they actually share the same idea of the value of caring. So both conservatives and liberals believe in caring. Here's where it gets weird. If you were to look at a chart of like how much people value these various bases of morality, right? From the conservatives value like all five, or maybe there's six, that one's up in the air, but they value all five more or less equally. As you move from right to left, people start caring about all of them except for caring less. And caring starts to skyrocket. So you get to people that are hard to the left, and they really care about caring. They really care about not hurting. They really care about helping. And this can be a wonderful thing.
But who? Care about who?
That is the kicker. The act of caring requires usually, and there are exceptions. I've met people who are exceptions to this. I'm a Buddhist, and I see this in Buddhist teachings a lot, that there's certain ways of caring that really are caring for everybody. But most people, their instinct when it comes to caring is find somebody who's worse off than everybody else and therefore needs more from them or from society, right? Caring is often about picking winners and losers, finding the underdog and helping them out. And once you take on that perspective and you center things on the narrative of that person you want to care about, you sort of lose the ability to see them as, judge them by their actions, right?
Yeah.
And you tread, all extremists for different reasons on the right and the left tend to fall in the trap of something called essentialism, where
What's that?
I'm trying to tell you, man, they fall in the trap of essentialism, which is they basically say, well, you're a person who has these characteristics, like you're a good guy, you're a good person, therefore everything you do must be good. And if you're a bad person, everything you do must be bad. Again, like think of this in terms of racism, right? Like a white supremacist, right? A white person and a black person can do the same thing, and the white person's good and the black person's bad. They can be exactly, and you can take out every other confounding factor. If it's just about race, liberals, of course, typically don't like racism, but they believe in caring. They want to help the underdogs. Well, some underdogs are underdogs because the system is against them, right?
Yeah. It's unfair.
But sometimes people make bad choices.
Yeah.
Sometimes people do bad things, and this is a point I make all the time. I've worked with a lot of black people. I've met a lot of black people. There are a lot of great black people out there. But fundamentally, I think it'd be racist to argue there are no bad black people.
Right.
Because I know there's a bunch of bad white people. There are just people that are, look, you can be any race and you can be a member of you have those dark triad characteristics of narcissism, Machiavellianism, psychopathy. That has nothing to do with race.
Well, it's another thing too. It's like everybody always seems to remember all like the kings and knights and dukes that their great ancestors are, but nobody remembers the bank thief or horse thief or like that we know is out there.
But my point with that is, so essentialism is where you reduce somebody to like what they are, to an essence, and say they have these features. So, right, a chair is a chair because it has some sort of inherent chairness. Whereas instead of like, well, no, we build these things that we like to sit on, and for convenience, we call them chairs. So what happens is with right now in this moment where the internet has really forced everybody, particularly in the streams, into like very tight orthodoxies. And you see this in Disney. This is actually something that's been going on for a long time. It's been going on for as long as Tangled.
Okay.
At the beginning of the movie Tangled, it's a Rapunzel story, right? And
the series or the movie?
The movie. I didn't know there was a series. It's a Rapunzel story. And it's about how this meteor comes down, there's a plant, and the witch, I think...
Really?
Yeah. And she goes to the plant, she sings to it, and it keeps her young. And they're like, but then the queen got sick, and she needed the plant to be saved, and the witch wouldn't share. That's what the narrator says. What the movie actually shows is soldiers storming out of the castle gates, digging up the plant that this lady relies on to live, turning it into like a stew that she drinks, and then she has a baby. And so the plant is gone. It's not a question of she wouldn't share. The plant is gone. And that's why in their version of it, she steals Rapunzel, because Rapunzel, her hair has the glowing magic power, but if you cut the strand, it goes dark. So at first she tries to take some of the hair. So everything she does is justified by the fact that they stole her plant, and yet she's the villain. You know, that's what I mean by essentialism. They knew that she was I don't know how they wrote things and rewrote them, but clearly they knew she's the villain, and therefore she must be the bad person. And they couldn't see like the situation they'd set up. If you're because I was like, literally how I saw this was I was down in Kentucky visiting my grandmother. We're getting ready to leave to come back to Michigan. We just turned the TV on to keep the kids interested while we're getting ready to go. And this movie starts up, and I was like, this is the most evil thing I've seen. Like you would think that they were all fascists at Disney.
Yeah.
And the crazy thing is they didn't realize that. And that's key to understanding WandaVision. Because they had this essentialist idea, they actually ended up making like a crazy right-wing story where the kings and the queens have the right to steal this thing this lady found and use it to keep herself young for their purpose. And it doesn't matter, they destroy it. They literally couldn't see it because they picked winners and losers already.
Yeah.
And for them, it wasn't that story that I think, maybe I'm in left field on this one. I think a lot of people, especially back then, were just willing to take the Disney line. People are more critical of Disney works now. For me, I'm like, I understood they hadn't meant to tell that story.
Yeah.
It was the story they were telling, though. And that's what happens in WandaVision. So we get 3 episodes where it's unclear. We know something weird is happening.
Yep.
And we know that Wanda, to some extent, has an ability to influence the situation, but she also appears not to understand the situation.
She's either you question whether she's being manipulated or like she's in doubt or like caught,
like trapped in her own mind, maybe.
Yeah, or purposefully just in denial.
Yes, yeah. Like, when she rejects that the beekeeper coming out of the sewers and just makes him disappear, like she might just be saying no and not accepting it and moving on and turning away, and she doesn't really understand what's happening. That's all possible. And you get to the end of episode 3, where she casts Geraldine out of the hex. Even then, like, particularly,
which we'll come back to.
So it's possible for people to get in, apparently, that don't belong. But it could still be that she got into the hex, but Geraldine was like the only real person in the hex, right?
Oh, maybe they're all fake.
That's why her being an outsider is such a big deal. Because frankly, having seen the whole series, I don't know why being an outsider was a big deal.
Yeah. Well, and also they kind of, when they show them talking about the town, it's like, oh, people that live around the town don't think it's there.
Yeah, they've forgotten about it. Like, why?
Or don't believe it's there. Or, like, either they didn't know it was there and it just appeared out of nowhere, or like they're being...
Well, the FBI lost... That's what starts the sword stuff, is the FBI lost an informant in the town.
Right. But what I mean is, like, so it could have been like, yeah, they're all not real. None of them are real, except for the people that go in.
Yeah. It's very possible. But where the show starts to go wrong is there... So at the end, Geraldine, this character we've known as Geraldine, says it's all Wanda. Fair enough. That still doesn't make Wanda culpable for anything, right? People can be out of their control of their emotions. They can have mental illness. They can have breakdowns. But she's realizing it's not something somebody's doing to Wanda. Wanda is the cause.
You said Geraldine, isn't it?
We'll get there. I just said the character we've known as Geraldine. In the first 3 episodes, we know her as Geraldine.
Oh, yeah. Wanda's...
In Wanda's story, yeah.
Gotcha.
And we don't know her as anything else until we move on to the next episode, episode 4. Episode 4, we find out that Geraldine is actually someone named Monica Rambeau, who we last saw as a little girl in Captain Marvel.
Okay.
And actually, this is a great example of them not thinking things through, because in Captain Marvel, little girl Monica Rambeau is talking to a little Skrull alien. They're shape changers, right? They can they can look at you and become you. And the little Skrull girl says to little Monica Rambeau, I wish I had eyes like yours. And little Monica Rambeau's like, no, never change anything about yourself. Which makes sense from a human perspective, right? I mean, Toni Morrison, winner of the Nobel Prize in Literature, wrote a book called The Bluest Eye about the perversity of a little black girl wanting to have blue eyes. I understand that from a human perspective. What the writers of this story didn't think about was the fact that the Skrulls are shape changers. Changing her eye color is that little girl's birthright. Asking her, it was so weird that no one who wrote that movie thought about it, right?
Okay.
That this was a human value
Being pushed onto some other
culture. That's part of their liberal orthodoxy, right? And they're so invested in that orthodoxy right now that they couldn't see that this thing that's true for us as human beings didn't make sense in that situation. Like, no one said to the little girl, well, actually, Skrulls can. Like, you can understand the sentiment from the little girl, even.
Yeah.
Right? As a character. Like, you couldn't judge a human little girl who said that to an alien because it's a little girl. She doesn't know. But it's weird that the writers didn't think of it.
Yeah.
It immediately took me aback because, you don't get a degree in English without reading a certain amount of Toni Morrison. Certainly not in the 90s. But this is where the second problem with Marvel comes in. And it's the franchise elements. Because franchise story can be a beautiful thing.
Okay.
Can be a great thing. The Marvel movies up to Endgame were a very solid franchise. There were very few that were like duds. Like one I don't like is Ant-Man, but people will tell me they love Ant-Man.
Yeah.
Okay, fair enough. I mean, Thor: Dark World has sort of a bad reputation. But on the whole, they were good movies. People liked them. They hold together well.
Mm-hmm.
So franchise can be a great thing, but what can happen with franchise is, of course, they start thinking in terms of, well, we have the audience locked in. Because you got to remember, when Marvel started, they didn't start with a franchise. They started with Iron Man, and I think it's just called. I can't remember. I was getting confused.
Spider-Man,
it was a Hulk. No,
too.
it was no. The MCU starts with Iron Man and a Hulk movie.
Yeah.
And that Hulk movie wasn't even a Marvel movie because Universal had the rights to it. So it was like done in partnership with Universal. It's why they've never done, my understanding is that's why they've never done another Hulk movie, is they can't actually make the Hulk a main character. I don't know if that's true, but that's my understanding. So they piloted those two movies, then they did a few more, and then they did Avengers. They were trying things out. But at this point, as a mature franchise, they're like, we want to be pumping out the content. We want to be setting up the next thing. That is a real problem. Because you're setting up the next thing. What it does is it distracts from the story you're telling. If you want to set up a character, that's fine. Put them in. Like Captain America Civil War is a great example of this by introducing Spider-Man and Black Panther. Great.
Okay. Unfortunately,
what I thought was going to happen was now we won't get origin movies for these characters. And then we got origin movies for both. It's like, you're killing me, Marvel. I thought that's one of the problems too, is they just keep making origin movies.
Well, it's that cookie cutter mentality. This has worked in the past. Cut, paste.
The stories have to be incomparable. Like, you have to be able to move the story forward and find new variations because people just get bored. Okay? Yeah. Like, I'm highly open to new experience, and there's no way to argue that I'm not. Right? And I'm getting bored with it. And I liked Marvel, and there's a lot of appeal, and I'm getting bored.
Yeah.
Right? And what it feels like is there was the story of Wandavision that was being told by the actual showrunner and creator. And then there were a lot of franchise elements that were being tossed in.
Like producer notes, it feels like.
Not even producer notes. They were probably like, but we're also going to need you to do this in this series. And the sword stuff doesn't really help much. And in fact, it's downright terrible.
Yeah.
Because it really reveals this idea of essentialism and certain people matter and others don't. Like Monica, she comes back into existence in this hospital where everybody who got snapped away in the hospital is zapping back into existence. And a doctor still takes the time to talk to her directly. And he's like, I'm sorry, honey, your mom died, while you were gone. And, like she has this real conversation as chaos is going on.
Oh yeah. It's
Monica is somehow the most important person. So then she goes back to her old job at Sword, which used to be run by her mom, is now run by Hayward. Now it's already suspect that she's working at her mom's place because this is a government agency. It's not a business.
Well, I think she was working there before.
She was, but that's already suspect that she was working in her mom's agency because they said her mom started it.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, her mom started Sword. And Hayward's like, well, I know it's awkward that you weren't around when they had to pick a new leader, suggesting that she should have got it because it was her mom's thing. No, that's nepotism. That is the definition of corruption in government. All right. It's bad enough when somebody wins an election based on their family name, but at least the public weighed in on it. This idea that she could inherit a leading role in an agency only makes sense if you think Monica Rambeau is one of the most important people in the world.
Or in the MCU.
In the world.
Yeah.
in the world of that narrative, right?
Yeah.
And the problem is she and some of her fellow good guys in this story they're going to be flat wrong. They're on the wrong side. Because what we learned from Monica Rambeau by the end of episode 4. So episode 4 is like a flashback, and it goes into episode 5. And it shows what happened to Monica. Monica's experiences before the hex, and then, like in the hex and during, and then like episode 5. I think it goes forward a little bit, and then episode 5 is really carrying the plot forward from there. And now we know about this stuff on the outside of it, in the hex. We didn't need all of that.
No.
And the problem is they've decided Hayward's a bad guy.
Well,
because he's researching weapons.
Well,
because he's a jerk.
Yeah.
But it's like, why is Darcy not a jerk? We show her being just awful to a guy on the trip to the Sword Camp. But she's fine. She's a good guy. Because they've decided who the good guys and the bad guys are already. They know who the heroes and the villains are. Because I don't know what the story was supposed to be originally. And I know the show got impacted by COVID. And I would be more forgiving of its flaws if its flaws didn't turn up in practically every other Marvel and Star Wars project made since then. Hayward isn't actually evil. Like his apology for taking over the agency, that's how that should have worked.
And the things he does make sense.
I mean, she's just a captain. Do you realize how low a rank a captain is in every service but the Navy? Like, I don't want to, it's only like 2 up from the lowest lieutenant, from the lowest ranking, right? This is an agency that has majors.
Yeah.
So major is a step above captain. And there's this idea that, I know I'm going off a little bit on government structure here, but there got to be a ton of captains in this agency, right? The idea that any one of them could just get the job, right?
Well, it's basically saying, come off, you're flying this fighter pilot, now let you run the show.
Yeah, you could get there eventually from the fighter pilot role, but there's a bunch of rungs to climb in between.
Yeah.
That having been said, so the problem with Hayward is like they keep acting like he's awful. He's a bad guy. And it's not clear why. Because what we find out is he has an evil plan that I don't think was thought through entirely, and they may have changed along the way. Mm-hmm. Because this is the events of WandaVision from the perspective of Hayward. Okay? People get snapped back. He has Vision's body in a lab. He tries to get Wanda. He brings her to Vision in the hopes that Wanda will resurrect Vision. Mm-hmm. Doesn't work out. She leaves. He goes on with his life. Then he gets asked by the FBI to help him out with something. And he gets called to this anomaly that we end up calling the Hex. And oh, look, Wanda's in there and she has a Vision. And he's like, okay, here's my opportunity to resurrect Vision.
Yeah.
But what we find out, and it's weird because what he says is Wanda stole Vision's body. He shows some videos, says Wanda stole Vision's body. And that she's trying to resurrect him in violation of his living will. First of all, I don't even know if androids have rights. Like, I don't know. Like, that's so weird. But it turns out his evil plan is to somehow get his version of Vision restarted and then swap the Visions.
But even that's like a background plan. The main reason he goes there is to try and
he goes
save
there
the people.
He goes there to rescue Monica and then to try to save the other people because they realize who the people are. Yeah,
which is his bad plan.
Yeah, that's his evil plan. Yeah, like there is a theoretically, we've been told his plan for Vision is bad. And he definitely wants to do that. But there are moments where, like Monica says, he'll burn Westview to the ground to get what he wants. We never see him attempt that.
Yeah,
we never see that.
And he seems more like on the side of the people than she does.
Absolutely. And for a while there, I thought, see, here's the thing. I thought for a while she was like, if not being mind controlled by Wanda, that just by identifying so strongly with Wanda, she had lost perspective.
Because when she was in the Hex.
Yes, because she was overwhelmed by Wanda's grief. But no, she's the good guy. She's doing the right thing. And she's just this crazy, irresponsible person. And then there's this moment where Wanda walks out of the Hex. And she takes over the minds of a bunch of people with guns. And she talks to Hayward and she's like, I'm not the bad guy. You're the one that brought the guns. I'm sorry. I realize that as a liberal, you're probably not like the most Second Amendment friendly person in the world. But you can't. That's what we have people with guns for.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, not literally for people with superpowers, but yeah, if somebody takes over a town in America and enslaves everybody there,
bringing flowers ain't going to do it.
Yeah. We expect people with guns to show up, like in a
or like in the current crisis over in Russia and everywhere else,
or even school shootings, right?
Yeah.
And you look at what happened in Uvalde. We're mad the people with the guns didn't rush in. Like that's how crazy WandaVision is, because they keep treating it as she's a good guy. We need to understand her. We got to work with her. Why would she do that? There's several times they try to talk to her. Every time they talk to her, she shuts down the dialogue.
Yeah.
So once she steps outside of the hex, there's only one way Wanda can't have culpability for everything that's going on. And that is if she is being controlled by somebody else. And that's where I made a video last year. Because this moment came where she meets Agatha. She finds Agnes is really Agatha. And Agatha throws purple magic at her. And we get this song about how it was Agatha all along. Mm. And I'm like, oh, Agatha might be trying to mind control the Scarlet Witch for some reason. And she's actually caused this whole problem. And okay, so maybe this isn't Wanda's fault.
Yeah, maybe Agatha's the bad guy.
Yeah. And clearly, once again, they think she's a bad guy. The writers of the show think she's a bad guy.
Well, it's lumped with Hayward.
But we find out in the next episode that all that was wrong is that she was messing with Wanda's reality and like causing problems for Wanda. She didn't cause the hex. She's just trying to figure it out. And she wants to steal Wanda's powers. That's true. But the only bad things we actually see Agnes do are to the non-existent children.
Yeah.
The children that Wanda magically created that aren't real people. And she kills a bunch of people who are trying to kill her for breaking a rule. Yeah. So yeah, she wants to kill Wanda and steal her power, but I mean, the world's better off if she does, unless she does something like the hex, right?
And you could say, well, you don't know what Wanda's going to do. Well, we see that.
Or you mean Agnes?
No, Wanda.
Oh.
You're like, well, Agnes kills Wanda. That's bad, right? Well, but then we see what Wanda does in Doctor Strange 2.
Oh, yeah. Oh, I got you. Yeah, yeah. And that's another problem with the franchising thing. Why don't we talk about it right now? The problem with these franchise elements in these Disney movies, and you see it really clearly with She-Hulk. They wanted She-Hulk to be the series for women. They said that. They said it wasn't necessarily for men.
Okay.
Here's the problem. Like, think about WandaVision. Doctor Strange Multiverse of Madness makes no sense. It's very hard to understand what's going on if you haven't seen WandaVision. Because the whole thing is about her trying to get her reunite with her children.
But
real
really
versions of
Doctor Strange.
It's not about Doctor Strange at all. No.
It could have been. It could, like there are elements they could have made it a decent Doctor Strange with like him and Chavez.
It's more like he got sucked into the story between the Scarlet Witch, Wanda. And of course this happened because they want to represent women and minorities and center the story on them. That's not how stories work. Stories have to be about the people they're about.
Yeah.
That's what our brains need to engage with them generally. They should have just made Multiverse of Madness.
Yeah.
And it could be this story of this girl named America Chavez. Like, just as Doctor Strange was a side character in Spider-Man No Way Home, he could have been a side character in this.
Yes. Well, he is.
But, yeah, but the real issue is because of that, right? You can't skip these shows. Loki sets up an alternate explanation for like why there's a multiverse now when there weren't for the previous movies. Mm-hmm. She-Hulk itself sets up this premise of, it advances the Hulk story. He fixes his arm. It advances, I haven't seen the last episode, I stopped watching it, but like Daredevil's been in it and he's done stuff.
Oh.
Yeah, oh yeah. So let's assume it advances Daredevil's story. That's the problem. They've created a situation where you are expected to watch every show so that you can keep up with what's going on, rather than creating these like little pockets. Like, this is the show for women to deal with women's issues, and this is our psychological drama. With WandaVision,
then here's a cameo of your character, but doesn't necessarily you have to watch it to know.
Yeah, and the problem is, and so as a result, you can't have She-Hulk not be for men.
Yeah.
You can't.
We have to watch it.
You have to watch it if you want to keep up. It's highly likely to come up later.
Yeah.
So to come back to WandaVision, it turns out Agnes isn't running the show. And it turns out Hayward, he probably wants to resurrect Vision, and maybe that's bad for some reason. But they're just assuming he's bad. And so you have this final confrontation that's just like CGI, throwing stuff around, blowing stuff up.
Let's go back to that, though. Like, his plan was resurrect Vision, but he had no knowledge that Wanda was going to him introducing Vision, or her grieving over Vision, that she would create this hex.
No.
Nobody up to this point, the Marvel Universe didn't show she had that type of power.
They comment on this explicitly, that nobody knew that this sort of thing was even possible.
So how is that his plan?
It's not. But I think at some point it was. Like in the writing process, I suspect at some point it was supposed to be. I think something got lost.
Yeah.
In the shuffle. Because people are like, well, he shoots at the kids. The kids they all know don't exist.
Yeah.
And they're like, oh, burn the town to the ground. You don't see him attack anybody but
and
the
not
targets.
only that, his people are protecting the people as best they can.
Yeah, and they're like, we gotta fight for our home. Why? She's just gonna dissolve it in an hour.
And it's not her home.
It's not. She stole it. And they make it clear that she's torturing these people. And that's why I talk about the essentialism. Hayward is a bad guy because they decided he's a bad guy. Because if you're a person in that town, you're on Hayward's side. Yeah. And it doesn't matter how deep Wanda's grief is. It doesn't give her the right to do this to people.
No.
At all.
But that's us on the other side.
But the crazy thing is not only do they treat her as not a villain in this show, they try to. Like, Hayward's bad for thinking she's bad. But the same thing in Multiverse of Madness. Everybody's like, well, you were in a tough spot, but you made hard choices, but you did what you had to do. Monica at the end of this is like, they'll never know what you gave up. First of all, yes, they will. They were all living Wanda's grief. They all know exactly what she gave up.
They were in her nightmare.
Yeah. But just this constant coddling, not even coddling, that's not the right word. Like this unwillingness to see Wanda as someone with agency. And constantly needing to make her both stronger and morally superior than she clearly is. Because Wanda is a very complex character.
Yeah.
Like there's this things like where Hayward's like, she was radicalized by Hydra, and the good guys are like, that's an oversimplification. And he's like, because she won the trust of the Avengers. Yeah, and before that, she unleashed the Hulk on Johannesburg.
Yeah.
Like, Wanda has killed a lot of people on purpose. Like, there's this thing in Captain America Civil War that she does it on accident, but she's also done it on purpose. She's probably killed more people than any other Avenger, because you can't really blame the Hulk for being mind controlled.
Yeah.
He was a means to an end. She's not this squeaky clean morally, and that could have made it interesting.
I was going to say that there's your character
because FX had that series Legion, which has a very similar presence, a character with mind building, reality altering powers, who is, man, nobody in that show is 100% good or bad.
Well, nobody's in that sane either, really.
Well, no, some of them are more sane than the others, but like, nobody is 100% good or bad, and that's what makes it interesting. Yeah. Like, there are moments where people literally hate each other and they have conflicts, but you can see to some extent each side.
But then again, they're not picking.
It's like you mind controlled me, but you tried to murder me.
Yeah, but they're not also going, you're evil, you're good, so everything you do is wrong.
Exactly. And that's why I kind of hope WandaVision would be. Not exactly, but I thought it was going to be that vein. But it takes such a black and white moral view that, and then it gets it wrong because they're unable to see Wanda's actions as bad. They're unable to see actions as good or bad. They assign good or bad based on who did them.
Right.
And, most people, that's a sign of extremist thought. Most people in the middle don't see reality that way. That's not how we perceive it.
Like taking a step back from it and looking at it, like, what did Wanda do? Like, as they're writing this story, it really stands out what she had done to the people and to even Captain, I can never remember her name, Rambo.
Oh yeah.
Like, if you showed like a section of what she's doing to any person outside of watching the show, they'd be like, well, she's the villain.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, no, I mean, it's bizarre. And unfortunately, like I said, I could have blamed this on COVID, but these problems keep showing up in all the Disney shows.
No.
There's like Book of Boba Fett, which was truly terrible, but some of the ways in which it was truly spectacularly terrible was that they so allowed for decentering that not only does Boba Fett move out of the way quite often to allow diverse characters to do things, a whole episode. So there's one episode where he's only in for one scene that's mostly focused on the Mandalorian, and there's a whole episode that's entirely focused on the Mandalorian.
Well, we call those commercials.
They literally stopped the story to show the Mandalorian. And the thing is, a big part of that episode is the Mandalorian's getting a new ship because he's a bounty hunter, and his ship, the Razor Crest, was blown up.
Yeah.
And that ship was like an SUV, RV. if you want to think about it in Earth terms, right? It was big, it was bulky, had room to live in. The lady building him a ship is building him like this teeny tiny little starfighter, which is like a motorcycle. And don't get me wrong, I know that the idea of a bounty hunter on a motorcycle seems cool. I mean, I think there was a whole show in the 90s called Renegade about that, but it's deeply impractical.
Yeah.
Because how are you going to transport your prisoners? And so she takes, there's a seat for the pilot, and then there's a spot for the droid, and she puts a canopy over that. And at first I'm like, oh, maybe that's where he's supposed to keep his prisoners. Like he just kind of sticks them in there. But then immediately I was like,
nope, that's for baby.
Yeah, that's what I realized. I looked at Jen, I was like, he's getting Baby Yoda back, and that's Baby Yoda's seat. And here's the other thing I know. He's not going to be doing any bounty hunting in Mandalorian Season 3.
No.
Yeah, because Mandalorian Season 3 is going to be... clearly, he doesn't need to do about... Like, they've given him a starfighter. He's going to need a starfighter in Mandalorian Season 3. And the problem is they've let the design lead the story. Because he even says, I don't need a ship like this. And she's like, no, it's great. Give it a chance. No. He doesn't need a sports car. He needs a truck. I literally use this as an example in the Guide to Good Story that if what you want is a sports car, no truck could ever meet your needs.
Yeah.
And if you're a farmer who needs a truck, no matter how much you like a sports car, it's not going to do the job you want. It's not just a question of better or worse. So that's how much it took me out of the story. And here's the thing. I've spent the time doing the deliberate practice, building the mental representations to understand why I'm disengaging. But people who haven't just disengaged, and they're not even going to know why.
Yeah.
Like people didn't like Book of Boba Fett, but people almost never mention this issue with the Starfighter. But it's more important because System 1 does not do a good job of communicating with System 2, right?
And that's what we're trying to help you with.
Yeah. You know, System 1 gets trained by System 2, but it's good at communicating its feelings, but not why it feels that way. Yeah. And you have to, System 2, the part of you that thinks in words, has to learn why that is. That's what we're here to help you to do. But because I'd spent the last 3 years writing a book and researching psychology for the book, I was like, I know exactly the problem here. Like they're tipping their hand on the story. Like I know what's going to happen because it's what must happen. But it's insane that this character would tolerate it, right? Because again, Star Wars doesn't exist. Actually, that's another great example from the book too. Is in The Mandalorian at the end of season 1, they give him that jetpack.
Yeah.
And they're like, you won't be able to use this till you practice with it. And he immediately like throws it on and flies away and flies with it perfectly. Yeah, Mandalorian jetpacks don't exist. I'm paraphrasing from the book now. They don't exist, so they could have done anything. They were undefined.
They didn't have to make that point of saying
exactly. It's an own goal. It's a mistake. It's like because they're saying they told you. The only reason I thought he couldn't use it was you told me he couldn't.
Yeah.
So the only reason I disbelieved was because you told me to disbelieve. If you cut that line out of The Mandalorian, I'm like, okay, Mandalorians know how to. Sure.
Part of his training.
Sure. Why not? You make up the rules, not me. But likewise, like, you don't have to believe. It's, well, Marvel and Star Wars, but like, you don't have to. Look, as far as I know, there's no TARDISes in Star Wars where things are bigger on the inside. He's got a starfighter. You just go, no, I cannot use this.
Yeah. I was talking about, like, and on the Marvel side, you've got, like, in She-Hulk with his bringing his hand back, the Hulk's hand back.
Well, that's just undoing a consequence. That's an entirely different bad thing, but you're right. Rolling back consequences is tremendous. And of course, they do this in WandaVision. They do it kind of nicely, the way they bring Vision back. Yeah. But yeah, they undo the killing of Vision, right? There's a new Vision out there. So the thing about bringing Vision back is the more you bring people back from the dead, the more System 1 can't take it seriously that they're in any real danger. And this is a mistake people make because they're like, oh, this happens in comic books all the time, right?
Yeah.
Comic books aren't stories. Comic books contain stories, but stories have beginnings, middles, and ends. Comic books start, and if they're successful enough, they never end.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, but like, they also have the turnover of their audience, too.
Yes. Yeah. So when we read comic books, we read them like in the ages like 14 to 18 or something, which is pretty much the age range of most comic book readers of the time. And so you get to a certain point in life, you read comic books, and then you let it go. And that's more or less what we did because we moved on to other things. I don't know if it's still the case, but certainly was back then. So it made sense to kill characters off for the sake of a story. But then after 5 years, you've rotated your entire audience out and you want to tell stories of that character again. So you find some reason to bring him back to life. It's not so much a problem because if I know I'm only going to read comic books for 5 years and this guy dies and he's going to stay dead a while, for all practical intents and purposes, he died.
Yeah.
You know, the problem with bringing back a character like Vision or undoing the Hulk's arm in She-Hulk is it removes all the consequences for their actions, for what happened.
For the same audience.
Yeah, so you can't feel risk. Yes, for the same audience. So you can't feel risk on their behalf.
Right.
I suspect soap operas work very similarly. My suspicion is back in the soap operas, probably wasn't like all women that they appealed to. It was like women with children of specific ages.
Yeah.
And again, that's why you would kill people off and bring them back. I suspect that's one reason why it would work was, you know, like you were rotating your audience a bit. And then sometimes people just don't care. They want their fan favorite back. But then you can't keep killing them off.
Yeah.
So that's a big problem is the rolling back of consequences. But WandaVision took it a step further because we haven't even said the word Quicksilver yet.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So the Quicksilver error is the worst mistake. I mean, it's because it's not even a mistake. It's a troll. They were trolling their audience because people knew sitting down to watch this that Wanda was going to appear in Multiverse of Madness. We knew multiverse stuff was coming. Mm-hmm. So in WandaVision, actually, I would have given up on episode 5 if Quicksilver hadn't shown up and kind of kept my hopes alive. Something redeemable was going to happen. But the Quicksilver who shows up is not the Quicksilver that was her brother in the Avengers.
Yeah. And maybe they couldn't have got the actor, but who knows?
Who knows? But what they did was they hired Evan Peters, who played Quicksilver in the Fox X-Men movies, suggesting there's some multiversal thing. They're leveraging the fact we know about these other movies and suggesting a connection between them. So, yes, they're making us aware we're watching a story, that we're experiencing something that's not really happening in front of us. But it's good just getting the juices flowing. You're trying to figure out how things are connected and where might it be going.
But then you're pulled out.
Yeah. You're pulled out because of what they did with it.
Yeah.
Which is, it turns out he is not the X-Men Quicksilver. He's just a guy named Ralph Bohner. They just cast the guy who played the X-Men Quicksilver as Quicksilver in this, as like a meme or as an Easter egg.
Yeah.
And here's why this doesn't work, but like the J. Jonah Jameson thing does in the Spider-Man movies. Because he really was J. Jonah Jameson, right? Like they cast the same guy, and in a multiversal sense, of course, he might look the same or slightly different in different realities. But first of all, the Ralph Bohner was a crazy name, and the excuse they gave for that is that it's a reference to the fact that the director appeared on Family Ties, I think not Family Ties, Growing Pains, a small role. I think he was one of the kids from the spinoff. That's why my understanding is from looking it up. But there was a character on Growing Pains called Bohner, and he's like, "Oh, it's an homage to that." No, it was a full stop. That was a moment that just stopped people.
Yeah, but like, what are you supposed to do? Like, who would even? You had to go look that up.
Yeah. Like that had to be explained. Like that's
nothing to do with Marvel.
Here's the thing: as an Easter egg, it would have worked. But Bohner is such a specific name. I mean, like literally, there's a Family Guy joke about how somebody mentions Growing Pains to Peter, and he starts laughing, and he's like, "There was a character named Bohner," you know. But that's the problem. Like, first of all, your Easter egg was way too distracting, but moreover, you were just trolling us. Like, there really is no artistic, aesthetic reason. There's no technical, making the story more believable reason to make Evan Peters Quicksilver.
And it's not even an Easter egg for your audience.
No. I mean, it was too well known. There's nothing obscure about it. You could not notice it.
Yeah.
People were wondering about it before they knew Evan Peters was going to be in the show, and they were wondering about it before the show came out. And it was the most so you've provoked all this disbelief just to not satisfy your audience. Mm-hmm. Like it was the craziest double down on pissing people off I've
and another thing,
because you can't even blame it on liberal ideology. Right, you can't. Whereas with Wanda, they can't see her as having full agency because she's a woman, and women have to be strong and good. We can't show. It's a little bit like Evan Peters played Dahmer in the Netflix series. Netflix just had a series come out for Dahmer, and they flagged it as LGBTQ, and the LGBTQ community got mad. But the thing is, like, they're not saying gay people. No one thinks even the worst homophobes don't think all gay people are serial killers. But he was a gay serial killer who killed gay men. Like. That's an honest tag. Like, if you want to watch movies about LGBTQ, Dahmer is an appropriate thing to recommend to people.
You want diversity.
Well,
here's the other thing.
I literally saw an article. It was like, this isn't the representation we want.
But we got to understand, you want diversity. Like you can't just have good because it's not interesting.
Well, yeah, within the stories, certainly, yeah. I thought you were talking about like with the tagging on Netflix. No, I mean, and Netflix took it down. They bowed to the pressure, but I mean, it's like, look, gay people, it can happen. It did happen. I'm not gonna, I don't get mad when they like people are like Ted Bundy was a straight white, he's the worst serial killer. He was a straight white man. I can't change that.
Oh man,
I can't change that. One. So yeah, you can understand that though. You can understand why gay people didn't like that label because it's not the most flattering aspect of gay history, right?
Sure.
Again, from the liberal perspective, there's no excuse for the Ralph Boner thing. There's no excuse for casting Evan Peters in that role. And I feel like that has also carried through. Like just this absolute disregard for the audience is what it showed that has carried through all these Marvel movies or Marvel streaming projects. And it's crazy how fast it changed after Endgame. In fact, you were telling me you heard they were hiring a bunch of people from like Rick and Morty and Community.
Oh, yeah, they did. And maybe it's because of the multiverse experience that they have with the writers. It was all on the writer staff.
Okay.
It's like they hired in writers from Rick and Morty, Community, and some of these others that Hammond had hands in for
Harmon.
Yeah.
Dan Harmon is what you're trying to say. But here's the thing. After you told me about that, and that's why I want to bring it up here. After you told me about that, who used to work with Dan Harmon was the Russo brothers, who made some of the best and most successful Marvel movies. Captain America, Civil War, Winter Soldier, Infinity War, Endgame, right? So it occurs to me that it's not just the Harmon touch, that the Russos might be recommending people to them. They might be going to the Russos and saying, we need to right the ship. Because as we're always saying, you can have diversity and tell a diverse liberal story and be high quality.
Yeah.
Or be high value anyway. The Matrix was a high value movie.
And
that conservatives love, even though it's very lefty. In the Heat of the Night, I think to me is the classic example. It's one of the few movies that ever won Best Picture Oscar that I think legitimately was probably the best picture made in that year. Mm-hmm. It's about racism. It's a high value, high quality movie. It's all about all the characters' various dilemmas. But in order to have a dilemma, the character needs to have at least the potential to be wrong. They need to have, either their values have to be in conflict, which that could have happened with WandaVision. Like, I don't want to give this up because of all my grief, but they never really play up that angle of it. It's taken as read that that's there, but the conflict it's about other people talking to her.
Yep.
And it's not about her actual struggle with what she's done, whether it was intentional or not.
Her real conflict is with other people trying to stop her.
And because they won't give these women, like Monica Rambeau, she doesn't have a heroic flaw, that flaw we talk about, whereas literally at the beginning of Iron Man, they're like, the best thing about Tony Stark is the worst thing about him. The thing that makes Tony great is the thing that makes him vulnerable and causes him to make mistakes.
But it also is what makes him interesting.
Yes, because they're not interesting because you're good. Stories are not about a series of good things happening to good people. That is boring. Like no one wants that. All stories need a character with a problem, and usually that problem needs to be a dilemma. And we've talked about this at length elsewhere, and we'll talk about it at length again. Certainly, again, go the Guide to Good Story. We'll tell you what it takes for a story to be high quality that will keep you engaged, like provided you actually want to experience the content that will keep you engaged. 'Cause that's what we mean by high quality. We just mean if for some reason you want to experience it, you will be engaged. Your brain will be able to generate the suspension of reality for you to enjoy the story. And low quality is if it has all these things you like 5-year engagement,
right?
For us, and you still can't enjoy it, that's usually a sign of low quality. Even if you don't know how to define low quality, that's a pretty surefire case that it's actually bad.
Yeah.
So I think we have. One other point I want to talk about the representation though, because this goes back to the undoing things.
The snap.
Actually, yeah, because at one point in the show, they're like, well, Wanda did the best against Thanos. And then somebody else was like, Captain Marvel did. So they're playing up the two women, right? Mm-hmm. It's like, yeah, but then Thor almost killed him and then did kill him. And it's clear Thor could have killed him. Like Thanos says it to him. You should have gone for the head. If you'd done that, I'd be dead and I couldn't snap. But they leave that out. And again, that, it's... Got a noise outside the window. And again, like they gloss over her unleashing the Hulk on Johannesburg, which you suspect must be known, unless that's the thing. Unless somebody covered it up and just blamed it on the Hulk, but then you got to say that.
Yeah.
You got to say that. You got to explain that to the audience. I think that's another thing is a lot of these characters, they all seem to know exactly what the audience would know, rather than like having weird gaps in their knowledge because they're experiencing it as the real world. It's like, you
They
know,
have in-depth dossier on all these people for some unknown reason.
yeah, like just off the top of their heads, they know stuff because they didn't show like a sequence of them reviewing the files on. They show them talking about the people in town, but not reviewing Wanda, not reviewing Pietro, things like that. So, with all that said, I think we've said enough about WandaVision, and so from here we'll be taking some content from this, maybe adding some things to it, posting some additional videos. We'll be recording commentaries. Again, I think we're gonna do most of the Star Wars movies. We're gonna do
Start with 4.
Yeah, we'll not call it Star Wars because that's its legal name. Start with Star Wars. We're also gonna do a bunch of the MCU movies because they're so vital to modern franchise storytelling. So we're going to start there with Iron Man. We're going to start there at the beginning too. And we'll probably be doing a number of other relevant, like one-off works, like, The Matrix, probably J.J. Abrams' Star Trek, or just movies we'll want to cover, like maybe Ferris Bueller's Day Off and Groundhog Day that we think are useful to talk about. With that, I think I'm good.
Yeah.
All right. So this has been the Intensely Casual Commentaries. I'm Logan.
And this is Chris.
So just a favor, if you enjoyed this, like the video, subscribe. And remember, if you can't say no to a story, you're not a consumer, you're a captive.